If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. My name is Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and a story editor, and I teach women who are writing in all genres how stories work so they can finish the books faster and without frustration.
And I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor, and poet, and I help writers find solutions for their story problems so that they can finish their novels.
On today's What Went Wrong episode, Melanie chose the movie The Golden Compass. This 2007 film was directed by Chris Weitz from a screenplay by Chris Weitz, and it's based on the book The Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. Of course, there will be spoilers because we can't talk about the movie without talking about the movie. And as always, we would really, really love it if you could help other writers find our show by simply leaving a rating and review. Apple Podcast listeners, it's really easy to do on your phone. Just go to the show's landing page, scroll to the bottom, click the stars. It really is that simple, and it helps us out tremendously. Okay, Melanie, The Golden Compass. Why did you choose this one this week?
All right, well, I chose this one this week because when it first came out, so the movie when it first came out, I was quite disappointed with it. And I had read the trilogy before I saw the movie. And the reason I chose it today was because it is pretty much scored about 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, right? So it's very much middle of the road. And our previous episodes have focused on some pretty bad movies where it's kind of easy to say everything is wrong with this movie. But The Golden Compass, because it is middle of the road, requires a little bit more thinking and thought about finding out what's wrong with it, or why didn't it get higher than that, and why didn't it resonate with audiences. So, and one of the fascinating things about this movie is that there are some very good actors in it, and their performances are excellent. And I particularly enjoyed Nicole Kidman as Mrs. Coulter. I thought she was excellent as a bit of a villain, but it still wasn't enough for this movie to score well. So I thought it would be a little bit harder for us to go and have a look at why this movie to have a look at what went wrong. Now, it's not going to surprise anybody when I say that the books are much better than the movie. And if The Golden Compass had received better reviews, then there were 2 more movies to make, right? Because there's actually, not surprisingly, it's a trilogy, so there's 3 books altogether, but it didn't even get a sequel. So why? So I find this interesting. So why didn't it get a sequel? And well, I think that there's a number of reasons, but I'm going to focus on 3 main ones. And the first one is the protagonist, then the world building, and then the ending. And I've got a subheading there for the ending is stop dumbing things down for kids, because this is one of my soapbox issues. I really hate stories that dumb things down for kids. Now, let's start with Lyra, right, the protagonist. Now, I found her in the movie incredibly annoying. And I think the problem was I had no empathy for her or with her. And this frustrated me a great deal because she should be easy to empathise with. She's an orphan. She's been closeted at Jordan College. And she has some good friends in Billy and Roger, right? Now, I think my problems with Lyra stem from a couple of things. And the first one is how she speaks to Pan, her demon. In fact, in this world, the demon is a person's soul, and in children, its form can change to reflect the child's mood. Now, Lyra is actually very dismissive of Pan and often goes against what Pan wants or advises. So Pan and Lyra are like 2 separate entities, but the other people and their demons appear more aligned in their personality. And so I found that quite difficult to reconcile, particularly because the other characters had a very different relationship with their demons, and she seemed to be quite negative and contradictory towards, or contrary towards, Pan. Now, Lyra is also fortunate, and what I mean by that is that she doesn't struggle very much. Yeah, sure, bad things do happen to her. So, Mrs. Coulter tries to take the alethiometer, and Lyra is hunted in the streets of London. But it's not too bad because the Egyptians come to her rescue. Then she's abducted and taken to Ragnar, the Bear King, his court, where she very quickly tricks him, and eventually he loses his life and his throne because of her. Now, this is like the so what of that and how that happens. It's just very easy. There's just no consequences, no real fallout of that, in my opinion. Now, even Mrs. Coulter, who is the villain, rescues Lyra and Pan from the intercision machine, albeit this is the closest Lyra comes to a life-threatening situation, or her life is in danger. So all of these obstacles that are placed in her way, or these situations that are difficult and uncomfortable for her, are resolved very easily. So again, I think that inhibits the development of empathy for her as a character. And it's also a problem because there is very little tension in the movie. Now, if everything works out for Lyra, then we aren't left wondering what's going to happen or how will she get out of this? Because tension is the expectation that something is going to happen. And it's important. And it's so important that we did a whole season on it a couple of seasons ago. So without tension, a story won't hold a reader's attention or a viewer's attention for that matter. Now, I'll give you another example. In the movie, Lyra finds Billy Costa minus his demon in a cabin. And she takes him back to his mum, Ma Costa, at the Egyptian camp. So, and that's what happens in the movie. And now I'm going to tell you what actually happens in the book, because you'll see the difference that the tension makes when I just read you this simple sentence, right? In the book, there's a child in the cabin that Lyra finds. It's not Billy Costa, it's a child. The child is pale. It's been separated from its demon, and the child dies shortly after Lyra arrives. And it is the result of intercision. And so what that does is it increases the stakes for Lyra, especially when she is put into the intercision machine, because that is a life and death situation that was set up in the book by that meeting of the child and the child dying. The fact that Billy Costa goes back to his mum is nice, but what it does, it is removes the tension and the stakes for Lyra when she gets put into that machine. Now, this happens a lot in the movie, and I'm going to talk about the softening stories in my third point, so just wait for that. Lyra is also a chosen one. Right? The opening voiceover lets us know that Lyra is the only one who can read the alethiometer, and the compass is made to read dust and to reveal truths. But so what? Right? So what? Now, there are prophecies about Lyra which are hinted at by the master of Jordan College, the Egyptians, and also Serafina Pekkala, who is a witch. But we don't know what Lyra has been chosen to do. And because we aren't clear about what the real threat is or what's at stake if the chosen one fails, then it creates a problem in the story. But what we do know then becomes more important. So we know that Lord Asriel and the Magisterium are searching for dust, but we have no idea about how or why Lyra is important to their quests. And if she is a chosen one, then the storyline for that particular type of character is usually linked to the survival of humanity or the world as we know it. So it's quite a powerful setup to have a chosen one in your story. But if you don't then fill in the detail, then it actually removes tension and stakes. And it's just, I think, poor storytelling. Now, the search for dust and indecision do link to Lyra's destiny, although it is unclear throughout the whole movie how that works. That is actually not the case in the book. So that's what I'm comparing a lot of this movie to. But this brings me to my second point about world building. The world in the Northern Lights is fascinating. And also in the Golden Compass, it's visually beautiful, right? So there are elements of 1920s steampunk mixed with Edwardian sensibilities, and also a bit of a Spanish Inquisition style magisterium. So that is really rich in terms of world building. There are also demons, and they are, I think, wonderful and fascinating in that world. So there is so much to love about this world and fall into. But what isn't clear is the politics between the scholars, Lord Asriel, the magisterium, and Mrs. Coulter. So that is very vague. And this makes it difficult to understand what's going on and what motivates these people and organisations. There's also the clans, like the Egyptians, the Panzerbjorn, the witches, and other groups of people. So we don't know why they are separate and what is the friction between them. And this isn't clear, and it's very distracting because the viewer is trying to work out the who and the why and the how they work together of these, how these groups work together, instead of actually following what's happening. So, for example, the first time Lyra's role in future events is mentioned, the master says he knows because of the witches, right? Later on, shortly, not too long after that, Fra Pavel, who is an official from the magisterium, talks to Mrs. Coulter about the prophecy of the witches. So then the natural question is, who are the witches and what do they do and how do they know this? Then Serafina Pekkala, a clan queen of the witches, appears and tells Lyra that she is glad that she's lived long enough to see her and meet her. But in all of that, we are still no closer to knowing more about the witches, more about the prophecy, why it matters, and what would it mean if Lyra was the chosen one or the child in the prophecy. Now, the beauty of the books, I think, is in the world building, and Philip Pullman is a great writer. And the world building offers the reader a chance to understand the story and the world without some of this clunky dialogue that we get in the Golden Compass. Now, I'm not going to touch dialogue, but it is very clunky. Take my word for it if you're not going to watch it. Now, from our previous study in world building, the more distant the world is from the primary world of the reader, the more world building is required. Now, world building doesn't need to just be exposition. It can be done and created via the protagonist meeting new people and experiencing events for the first time. Now, there are reasonable examples of this in the Golden Compass. So one of those examples is the alethiometer, right? This is a new device that Lyra's never seen before. So it's natural that the master tells her about it and what it's made for and what it's made from. However, giving it to Lyra before she goes with Mrs. Coulter and then telling her not to let Mrs. Coulter find it seems ridiculous and illogical. It's just I thought the logic of that doesn't make sense to me. Now, the world building in general takes time, and perhaps a 2-hour movie isn't the best format for this type of story. And finally, my last point, which is the ending. So having read the books and comparing the first novel to the movie, The movie has been dumbed down and abbreviated. And throughout the movie, we understand that Mrs. Coulter and the Magisterium are the antagonists. And Lord Asriel is portrayed as a heroic figure who Lyra goes in search of, particularly as he ventures out from the college and goes up to the North Pole, basically, to find something. We're not really clear in the movie what that is, but he's on a search. However, at the end of the book, and this is a spoiler, so if you don't want to know what the ending of the book is, what happens in the ending of the book, please skip forward now. So at the end of the book, Lord Asriel separates Roger from his demon and kills him in order to tear a hole in the parallel universe through the Northern Lights. Lord Asriel also explains that the Magisterium thinks that dust is the origin of sin. So these are very, very key pieces of information that you kind of need to know to make sense of the story. And it also helps you understand that Lord Asriel isn't a good guy. He's actually not a good guy. He kills Roger. Anyway, so in the book, children die at the hands of the Magisterium, Mrs. Coulter, and Lord Asriel. Death isn't really mentioned in the movie, and it's downplayed when Billy Costa is returned to his mother after the intercision. We need to stop dumbing down stories for children about significant events that they do experience in the real world. How do we expect kids to empathise or map paths for dealing with tragedy if they don't read about it? How do we expect them to be resilient if they are sheltered from life? Now, there was probably some pressure on the screenwriters or the screenwriter to sanitise the story, because there are some interesting and gritty sections of the book that aren't included in the movie. And I also know that there was enormous pressure placed on the makers by the Catholic Church, and there was a campaign by the church to discourage families from watching it. That's because the Magisterium it was quite obvious that the Magisterium is a version of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church didn't take too kindly to that. But what I really would like you to take away from this movie is that it is easy to identify what's wrong with bad movies, but you can identify story problems for middle-of-the-road movies when you understand the smallest amount of story theory. All right, Valerie, what were your what went wrong pickups this week?
Okay, this is interesting. It doesn't surprise me at all that you and I were picking up on the same thing. I made a few notes while you were speaking because there's a few things I wanted to follow up on. So when you were talking about Lyra in the intercision machine and Mrs. Coulter coming in and saving her, and you said her life was in danger, I said, yeah, but was it though? That was my question. I didn't understand what was at stake in that machine, because we had already seen Billy, who, seemed to be a little tired and a little under the weather, but there was nothing about it that made me think his life was in danger, or that now that he was back in the warm bosom of his mother, he wouldn't get better and make a full recovery. And she even says, "We will find your demon." So that whole thing confused me. So Melanie, when I watched this movie the first time, I haven't read the book. So I was coming to this cold. I was totally confused. And I started to make a list of questions, and I gave up because there were too many. I could not connect the dots between. That's true. I couldn't connect the dots. And so the second time I watched it, I again started to make questions, and I had a half a page of questions before we were even 5 minutes into the movie, of things that I couldn't understand. How does this connect to that? Why is this significant? Who is this person? All of the things that, you just connected the dots for me because you've read the book. So there were a lot of light bulb moments for me as I was listening to you. And in the ending, I'm not surprised that you said this is a trilogy and that, no other movies were made, because it ends feeling like there's another movie coming. Like, I think back to the movie Dune that we did, and I can't remember which season that was in, but that ended like another movie was coming. But in that case, we knew, yes, another movie was coming. They came out and said, this is like just the first part. So we weren't expecting a complete story from beginning to end. And they made that very clear from the outset. I had the same feeling with the Golden Compass, but they didn't make it clear that the rest of the story would be coming later. So when the movie ended, I went, well, where's the rest of it? Like, that's it? It's done? But I have questions. Where's Lord Asriel? What happened to him, for example? Anyway, yeah, so I'm really glad that you had read the book, because you just filled in a lot of blanks for me.
And you can make a lot of sense. Well, you can make more sense from the movie if you have read the book, because things like the magisterium, dust, what Lyra's role in that means, why the magisterium don't want the alethiometer, all of those things make more sense if you've read the book, because there's scope and time for Philip Pullman to build the world and establish all of those things. But the relationships between Mrs. Coulter, Lord Asriel, and Lyra are also very different. So there's a cruelty about Mrs. Coulter, which we see, but also Lord Asriel. And that really comes into fruition at the end of the movie, because they actually get together again at the end of the movie, and they're Lyra's parents.
At the end of the movie, or at the end of the book?
At the end of the book. At the end of the book,
okay.
They get together again, and then Lord Asriel kills Roger and opens up this hole in the sky, which then, you understand what's going on when you've read the book and you see the movie. And so when I say it's abridged and it's been softened, it really has. The book is much, much better than the movie. And it's disappointing, because it is a really lovely story. And I believe that a series has been made just recently out of all three movies. So there is a series that is the Golden Compass. I think it was made a couple of years ago, and that got much better reviews than the movie, because they would have had time to develop all of those things that, that we've probably picked up on in terms of that would help you understand the story,
right?
Objects of desire, all of those things, right? It would just have more scope to do that. I just haven't seen the series.
All of the stuff I'm about to talk about. So when you say the film makes more sense if you've read the book, it shouldn't.
No,
you should
I agree.
be able to come to the film cold. How many people, okay, so you and I are readers. The people listening to this podcast are readers. We have a little bias in that we usually think the book is better anyway, often, although there have been some exceptions, I have to admit. But we have a bias in favor of the novel. Fair enough. However, there's lots of people in my life, and I'm sure you know lots of people too, Melanie, who will say, when I recommend a book to them, they'll say, thanks, I'll wait for the movie. Right? So if you're going to do a novel to film translation, whoever comes to the film cold has to be able to understand the film without having read the book.
Mm.
That's one of the things that makes an adaptation successful. Okay, so with the Golden Compass, I mean, the very first thing, if I'm looking at my notes here, the very first thing that I said is, I think the problems with this film all boil down, or mostly boil down, to the fact that there's too much story being stuffed into one movie. And it's not even quite 2 hours. I think it's an hour and 45 minutes or something. And again, I'm only going to talk about the film because I haven't read the novel. So that it gives me a really good, fresh take on the movie. And like I said, I was completely confused. Now, when I say that there's too much story being stuffed into the space allowed, this is a really common problem with new writers. They just try to cover way too much ground in a book that's 80 to 100,000 words. The scope of their story is way too big. But I meet a lot of historical fiction writers who want to do sort of cradle to grave stories, and it's just too big. It's just too big. And what they're really trying to do is write a trilogy in one book, or maybe a 5-book arc in one book. And the reason it's such a common issue is because new writers just don't have the experience yet to understand what the natural scope of a story is and how much you can actually fit into a book. So I'm not saying that as a judgment call in any way, shape, or form. I'm just flagging it so that if you watch the film, you understand what the pitfalls are of trying to cover too much ground in too little space. Everything in this movie feels rushed. Nothing has time to develop. And everything that happens to Lyra feels too convenient by half. And Melanie, you already articulated several examples of this. There are way too many characters, so we don't have an opportunity to get to know any of them or to emotionally connect with any of them. And when I say too many characters for a story this length. When you are writing a fantasy trilogy, or like a space opera or something like that, that is expansive in nature, you are going to have a large cast of characters. But that's that style of writing. And it's very different than this style in writing. It's the difference between writing a 7-book fantasy series and writing a novella. If you're writing a novella, you have a very small cast because you only have 50 or 60,000 words, and you can't accommodate a large cast in that number of pages or that number of words. It's the same effect here. So if you want to get a sense of what it feels like to a reader, watch this movie. And you'll get, you're like, oh, every scene is a brand new character that sort of comes into the movie and leaves the movie, and what's happening? Who's on first? What's on second? Okay. Stories with children or minors in them as protagonists really do have to create situations where the parents or the authority figure are absent. And if you think about it, there's a logical reason for that. And it's because children have no autonomy. Like, they are disenfranchised by nature. They're little. They don't yet have the skills to make the decisions for themselves in real life. And therefore, they have people to look out for them. And they do have to ask for permission to do things. And they can't get anywhere on their own. They just don't have that ability. So in a novel, then, those authority figures have to go away. They have to be removed somehow so that the character can stand on his or her own 2 feet. Now, Lyra, as far as she knows and as far as we know, is an orphan. Yes, she has an uncle. We know him as the uncle, but he's always traveling. So she lives in this boarding school. And while there are teachers around, Lyra has a huge amount of freedom. So that is working pretty well. I mean, it's the same thing in Harry Potter. It's the same thing in most kids' books, right? Somehow the parents aren't there for whatever reason. However, once the plot finally kicks in and gets moving, I just had so many questions. Okay. Now, let me just pause here for a minute, because questions in and of themselves are not a bad thing. When questions arise as a result of curiosity, that is excellent. That is narrative drive working as it should. The reader is wondering what's going to happen next. And that's the level of storytelling that we're striving for. That's the goal. But when questions come up because the reader is confused, or in this case, the viewer, like me, is confused, the story's in big trouble. And like I said, I had a whole lot of questions because I was confused. I couldn't follow it because I hadn't read the book. So, like, for example, who's the narrator in the beginning? Who is that? Is it the witch? I don't know. Maybe. Is it Seraphina? Not a clue. Not a clue. It's never answered. It's just this female voice that pops in, dumping a whole bunch of exposition, and then evaporating from the story. In the opening bit, where Billy is chasing Roger and Lyra, he wants Lyra to hand over Roger. Why? It turns out that they're friends. So what was all that preamble about? Is this just a game they play? I mean, it's an awful lot of film time in a short film, an hour and 45 minutes or whatever it is. An awful lot of film time is dedicated to setting Billy up as a villain, only to immediately destroy all of that tension by establishing them as friends. Billy will all of a sudden smiles and laughs, and Lyra and Roger smile and laugh, and they say, all right, we'll see you later. All tension has drained from the movie at that point. I was ready to bail at that point, and that's in the first couple of minutes, because I thought, you've just wasted my time. That was exactly the feeling I had. And someone, yes, will turn off a film or a TV show, but watching a movie or watching a screen is a very passive activity. And it actually takes action for someone to turn it off. So someone watching a screen is more likely to sit there passively and continue watching the screen. Reading a book is an active thing. It requires a reader to work, to actually work to read the words, work to visualize the events and the world and all that kind of stuff. It's much harder to read a book than it is to watch a screen. So at any point in your novel, if the reader thinks you've just wasted my time, they're done. They are not coming back to your book. They're putting it down and walking away. I know that sounds harsh, but that is the truth, because they don't have to read your book just because you wrote it. They don't have to. All right. In the scene where Lyra and Pan go to the council room, this is all in the first few minutes. So they're not allowed in that council room. I was wondering, well, what happens if they get caught? I was wondering, why does Lyra keep hiding from her uncle, who turned out to be her father, only to come out when he's about to drink the poisoned wine? And then why does this uncle father tell Lyra to go back into the cabinet? I'm like, what's going on? I don't understand why any of this is happening. Other questions I have. Why have Lyra's parents, 1, left her at the school, and 2, hidden their identity from her? They're masquerading as Mrs. Coulter and her uncle, Lord Asriel. So why is her father saying that he's her uncle? I don't know. Why is Mrs. Coulter saying, oh, I met Lord Asriel once? No, you didn't just meet him and have an academic discussion. You had sex with the guy. Right? Like, at the end when she reveals that Lord Asriel's the father, I'm like, what? I felt had there, and I didn't appreciate it. What happened to Lord Asriel? At 42 minutes, he's attacked, or maybe he's killed. We don't know. He's just gone, never to be seen or heard from again. And my question is, what exactly is the problem with dust? I watched it a couple of times trying to find the answer, and the one I came up with, I thought I got right. Now, having listened to you, nope, not what I got at all. What I thought was the problem with dust is that it makes people think independently. When I watched it the first time, I had no idea what the significance of the dust was. And I was paying attention. I really was. It's only after multiple viewings that I thought, oh, okay, people think independently. And I think the demon is the conduit through which the dust flows. Maybe that makes sense because the demon is the person's soul that exists outside their body. So maybe if you remove the demon, the person will be a soulless zombie who just follows the magisterium and does what they want them to do. It wasn't at all clear on the first viewing, and as it turns out, it wasn't clear after multiple viewings because I totally got it wrong. I like what's in the book a lot better. That is far more interesting, far more compelling. Another question I had is about the demons. They say that the demons are the person's soul existing externally to the body. Okay, I can follow that. That's all in the exposition voiceover in the beginning. No problem. But then I wondered what happened when the demon is killed. And I say here, I'm going to read my notes. Obviously, it doesn't kill the person because Billy is still alive after his demon has been killed or removed. I mean, I assume it was killed and it is not a soul wandering around in need of a body. Because remember, the bears want a demon. So this was another question I had. The bears do not have demons external to their body, so presumably their souls are internal. So do they want two souls? I have no clue. Totally confused. And Melanie, I can see you here on the video shaking your head. Clearly, this is explained in the novel. It's not explained in the movie. It's just confusing. I thought maybe there was a soul wandering out there in need of a body, because when Billy shows up with his mother, Ma Costa says to her son, "You'll be fine. We'll find your demon." So then what does this box thing that they're in that separates the demon from the person, what does it do? I didn't know. And I didn't understand that the demon changed form according to the child's mood. That was never made clear. So then my biggest question, Melanie, and you already honed in on this too. The biggest question I had was about the compass itself. Why did the master give it to her? Exactly like you, if Mrs. Coulter is the one person who can't have it, why are you giving it to her when she is leaving with Mrs. Coulter? Surely the compass has been safe in the school to this point. Leave it there. Mrs. Coulter clearly doesn't know it's there, or she wouldn't be bothering with Lyra. She would just be trying to get the compass, if that is the MacGuffin. It's not a MacGuffin at all. My question is, why can Lyra read it? She just can intuitively read it. Why were all of the compasses but one destroyed? And the compass itself is a huge problem. So she's given this compass and said, don't let Mrs. Coulter see it. Like, whatever you do, Lyra, don't let her see it. And then she just starts flashing it around everywhere. Like, sister, keep it in your pack. Keep it in your bag. Don't go whipping it out every 5 seconds and showing it to everyone. The compass also solves all of the problems that Lyra encounters. This is a massive world-building issue. I love stories with magic in them. This is one of the reasons I love fantasies and love fairy tales, and I love magical realism. That just tickles my fancy. However, the magic cannot be a cure-all. It can't solve all problems. Why? Because if it solves all the problems, it bleeds all the tension out of your story. If you drain your story of tension, you lose your reader because there's no conflict. I feel like I should just say ditto to everything Melanie just said, and then I would be done. It would make for a much shorter episode. Okay. The compass is also a really great example of the problem with setups and payoffs in this film. So Lyra gets the compass and is told not to tell anyone, but she does so, and so what? What are the ramifications? The master specifically says, and this is a quote, "The golden compass was given to the college by Lord Asriel a year ago, and now I'm giving it to you. I think you are meant to have it. But Lyra, keep the alethiometer to yourself. It is of utmost importance that Mrs. Coulter does not know that you have it. Do you understand me? Of the utmost importance." Okay, so why did Lord Asriel give it to him a year ago? Why is he giving it to Lyra now? Why does he think she is meant to have it? Why can't Mrs. Coulter have it? And why does Lyra keep flashing it around? And then at 30 minutes into the film, Mrs. Coulter's demon actually has the compass in his hot little hands. And so what? What are the consequences of that? What is at stake? No clue. It's a huge setup. It does not pay off. The object of desire comes too late. What does Lyra want? Well, early in the film, she tells Roger that if the gobblers ever get him, she will come and look for him. All right, so far so good. That's a great little setup. But then when Roger does go missing, she does not go looking for him. Instead, she leaves on the ferry with Mrs. Coulter. She seems perfectly happy with Mrs. Coulter until Mrs. Coulter wants the compass. And at that point, Lyra runs away, and it's only then that she says to Pan, "We've got to go find Billy and Roger." She doesn't seem concerned. She's not worried about Roger at all. Now, in fairness, she doesn't realize that they're actually snatched by gobblers until shortly before she goes missing, or until shortly before she runs away from Mrs. Coulter. But that's really late. That comes at about 32 minutes into the film. That's about 31% into the story. So a lot of precious screen time, of storytelling's time, has been wasted up front. This is when Lyra is finally setting out on her journey. This is when the object of desire is now starting to drive the plot. Because a plot is not just a series of stuff that happens, right? All right, then the other thing I've got highlighted here is how convenient everything is. And Melanie, you touched on this as well. Before Lyra can even get started on her journey, she's found by Ma Costa, who conveniently has been following her and watching over her, right? And this is a huge issue with the film. There is plenty of action scenes, lots of those, but there's very little story or scene conflict because just as Lyra gets into a pickle, something or someone happens along to make it all disappear. And if someone doesn't come along to make it all disappear, then the compass makes it all disappear. Ma Costa is just one example. Meeting Lee Scoresby is another. He just happens to be a pilot who just happens to be friends with Yorick, who's the ice bear. Lyra isn't even looking for a pilot, and she isn't even looking for an ice bear. They just show up, and presto magico, off they go. Like, I could go on and on. Melanie has already given a whole bunch of examples. You get my point. All right. And we've only just scratched the surface, Melanie. We could really go on and on, but I think everyone understands what we're saying. Okay, so with all of that said, Melanie, for the Golden Compass for you, what is the bottom line here?
So for me, the bottom line is that if a story is sanitized, then the risk is removing story elements such as tension, conflict, and stakes. And these are the elements that make a reader empathize with your protagonist. What about you? What's your bottom line?
Yeah, well, it's no surprise, right, that we both picked up on the lack of tension, conflict, and stakes. For me, the bottom line here is that we need to understand that a story isn't merely a list of things that happen. And without tension, conflict, and stakes, that's exactly what a narrative is. It's just a bunch of things that happen, and that is guaranteed to bore the heck out of your reader. All right, well, that wraps it up for this week. We have stood on our soapbox long enough. We would love to know what you think of this What Went Wrong episode. And of course, if there's a film that you'd like us to take a look at, feel free to reach out to us via email or social media. Next week, we have our What Went Right episode, so come join us as we discuss The Princess Bride. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For more information about our online training, please visit storynerd.ca/courses. To join my inner circle, go to valeriefrancis.ca/inner-circle. And for tips about books to help you read like a writer, go to Melanie's website, melaniehill.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.